On a sun-drenched spring afternoon in the Hamptons, real estate mogul Maxwell Thornton observed with suspicion the unlocked smartphone lying on the solid oak table in his mansion's meticulously landscaped garden. The newly hired gardener had left the device while retrieving her tools from the greenhouse. Maxwell, a man known for his ruthless business tactics and imposing presence, found his curiosity piqued by the unattended phone. He glanced around to ensure he was alone before sliding his finger across the screen. What he saw next made his blood run cold. A photograph of his mother, Eleanor Thornton, young and radiant, standing beside an unfamiliar woman at an unrecognizable location. Maxwell's face drained of color. How could this simple gardener possess such an intimate photo of his mother, who had passed away more than 30 years ago? At 62, Maxwell had built Thornton Estates into one of the most successful real estate development companies on the East Coast. After his mother's passing when he was barely a teenager, he had channeled his grief into ambition, constructing an empire with an iron will and unwavering determination. His colleagues described him as calculating and precise. His employees feared his cold demeanor and exacting standards. Few knew that behind his polished exterior lay a profound loneliness, a void he had never managed to fill despite his wealth and accomplishments. "Mr. Thornton?" The soft voice startled him. He quickly placed the phone back on the table, composing his features into their usual mask of indifference. "Ms. Gardner." His voice was clipped as he addressed the gardener, a woman in her 50s with a weathered face that somehow retained a youthful quality in her expressive hazel eyes. April Gardner had been hired just 2 weeks ago, coming with excellent references despite her unassuming appearance. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to leave my phone." She reached for the device, but Maxwell's hand shot out, gripping her wrist with unexpected force. "Where did you get this photograph?" He turned the screen toward her, revealing the image that had so disturbed him. April's expression shifted from surprise to something more complex, a mixture of anxiety and resolve. "I think we should talk, Mr. Thornton." "Indeed we should." Maxwell's tone was glacial. "My office, now." The walk from the garden to his home office felt interminable. Maxwell's mind raced with possibilities, none of them pleasant. Was this woman attempting some form of extortion? Had she fabricated the image somehow? The thought that she might be genuinely connected to his mother seemed too implausible to consider. His office, like everything in Maxwell's life, was a testament to his success. Mahogany furnishings, awards lining the walls, floor to ceiling, windows overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. He gestured for April to sit in one of the leather chairs facing his massive desk while he remained standing, a power move he had perfected in countless business negotiations. "Explain yourself," he demanded. April's hands trembled slightly as she reached into her worn canvas bag. "I wasn't planning to approach you this way," she began, her voice steadier than her hands. "I wanted more time to find the right moment." "For what exactly?" Maxwell's patience was wearing thin. She pulled out a yellowed envelope and placed it on his desk. "6 months ago, I found a box of letters in the attic of my adoptive parents' home after they passed away. Letters from Eleanor Thornton, your mother." She paused, seeming to gather her courage. "My mother, too." Maxwell felt as though the air had been sucked from the room. "That's absurd," he managed to say, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. "I was born Catherine Eleanor Thornton," April continued, pulling out a birth certificate from the envelope. "Given up for adoption immediately. I never knew until I found these letters." Maxwell scanned the document, his trained eye looking for signs of forgery, but finding none. The birth date placed this woman, Catherine, as 4 years younger than himself. The mother's name was unmistakably Eleanor Thornton. "This proves nothing," he said, pushing the paper back toward her. "Birth certificates can be falsified, photos can be manipulated." "There are 27 letters in that envelope," April replied calmly. "All written in your mother's hand over a period of years to someone named Rose, my adoptive mother's sister. They detail everything: her relationship with a gardener named Thomas Gardner, her pregnancy, her decision to give me up to protect the family name." She met his gaze directly. I took my biological father's surname when I discovered the truth. It felt right somehow. Maxwell's mind reeled. He remembered Thomas Gardner vaguely, a quiet, handsome man who attended the family's extensive gardens at their Hamptons estate during his childhood. He had disappeared suddenly when Maxwell was around 8 years old. His mother had never explained why. "Why come here now? What do you want?" His voice had lost some of its edge, betraying his disorientation. "Not what you think," April answered simply. "I didn't come for money or status or to disrupt your life. I came because I've spent 54 years not knowing where I came from. I applied for this job under my real credentials. I'm a professional landscaper with 20 years of experience. The fact that it brought me to my mother's home, to you, I just wanted to know my family, even if from a distance." Maxwell stared at her, searching for resemblance to his mother. The shape of her eyes, perhaps, the way she held her hands clasped in front of her, but his rational mind rebelled against the implications. "You're fired," he said abruptly. "Collect your things and leave the property immediately. If I see you here again, I'll have security remove you." April didn't seem surprised by his reaction. She gathered the documents with dignity, returning them to her bag. "I understand this is a shock. I'll go, but..." She withdrew a business card and placed it on his desk. "If you change your mind or if you have questions, you can reach me here." She walked to the door, then paused, turning back to face him. "She loved you very much, you know. In her letters, she mentioned how it broke her heart that she couldn't keep both her children together. How she hoped someday you might know each other." After she left, Maxwell remained motionless behind his desk, staring at the business card. April Gardner, Landscape Design. A simple white card with green lettering and a small illustration of a rose, his mother's favorite flower. The coincidence seemed too perfect, too orchestrated. Yet something about the woman's straightforward manner, her lack of dramatic demands, gave him pause. He picked up the phone to call his security team to ensure April Gardner had left the premises, when a sharp pain lanced through his chest. The room seemed to spin momentarily as he gripped the edge of his desk for support. When his vision cleared, he could have sworn he saw his mother standing in the corner of the office, wearing the same expression of gentle disappointment he remembered from his childhood when he had failed to show kindness. Maxwell shook his head to clear the hallucination, but the unsettling feeling remained. For the first time in decades, the foundation of everything he believed about his family, his mother and himself, had been shaken to its core. A week after firing April Gardner, Maxwell Thornton found himself standing before the board of directors at Thornton Estates' Manhattan headquarters. He had always prided himself on his composure during these quarterly meetings, delivering precise updates with unwavering confidence. Today, however, he struggled to focus on the projection screen displaying the company's latest acquisitions. "As you can see, our Brooklyn waterfront development is proceeding ahead of schedule," he explained, gesturing toward the charts. "Pre-sales have exceeded projections by 32%, and..." Maxwell froze mid-sentence. In the back of the conference room, where moments before sat his VP of marketing, he now saw his mother's face, young and vibrant, watching him with an enigmatic smile. He blinked hard, and the apparition vanished, replaced by the concerned expression of his executive. "Mr. Thornton," his CFO prompted, "are you all right?" The room had gone silent, all eyes fixed on him. Maxwell loosened his tie slightly, cleared his throat, and attempted to continue. "Excuse me. As I was saying, pre-sales have..." The words died on his lips as a wave of dizziness washed over him. The last thing he remembered was the alarmed faces of his board members as his knees buckled beneath him. He awoke in a private room at New York Presbyterian Hospital, his son Jason sitting vigilantly beside the bed. At 35, Jason Thornton had his father's commanding presence, but his late mother's gentler disposition. He had joined the family business after graduating from Wharton, working his way up through various departments to prove his worth rather than relying on nepotism. "Dad," Jason said, relief evident in his voice. "How are you feeling?" Maxwell attempted to sit up, wincing at the medical equipment attached to his arm. "What happened?" You collapsed during the board meeting, Jason explained. The doctors say it's extreme exhaustion and stress. Your blood pressure was dangerously high. Dr. Sarah Chen entered the room, chart in hand. Mr. Thornton, good to see you awake. You gave everyone quite a scare. When can I leave? Maxwell asked bluntly. Dr. Chen's expression remained professionally neutral. Not today. We need to run additional tests, and I'd like to keep you under observation for at least 48 hours. She consulted her notes. Mr. Thornton, when was the last time you took a vacation? Maxwell waved dismissively. I don't have time for vacations. That's precisely the problem, Dr. Chen replied firmly. Your body is sending you clear signals that you need rest. I'm prescribing at least 3 weeks away from work, somewhere peaceful with minimal stress. That's ridiculous, Maxwell protested. I have a company to run. Jason placed a hand on his father's shoulder. Dad, the company will survive without you for a few weeks. I can handle the Brooklyn project, and Victoria can manage the board. Victoria Mills had been Maxwell's trusted COO for over a decade. After Dr. Chen left, Maxwell sank back against the pillows, uncharacteristically defeated. The image of his mother in the boardroom haunted him. Was he losing his mind? Or was it his body's way of forcing him to confront what he'd tried to ignore, the possibility that April Gardner might actually be his sister? Jason, he said after a long silence. What do you know about your grandmother, Eleanor? Surprised by the unexpected question, Jason considered before answering. Not much, honestly. She passed before I was born. You rarely talk about her except to mention her business acumen. There are only a few photographs of her in the house. Maxwell nodded slowly. What about the old family estate in Connecticut? The one where I grew up? The Tudor mansion near Litchfield? It's been sitting empty for years. You always said you planned to renovate it eventually, but... Jason trailed off, clearly puzzled by this line of questioning. Maxwell made a decision. I'm going to spend my prescribed rest at the Connecticut estate, alone, he added when he saw Jason about to offer his company. Are you sure that's a good idea? The place hasn't been properly maintained in years. Marge still goes by twice a month to check on things, Maxwell replied, referring to their longtime housekeeper who had served the Thornton family for over 40 years. Call her and tell her to prepare the master bedroom. I'll need a car to take me there tomorrow. Dad, the doctor said 48 hours of observation. Then I'll leave the day after tomorrow, Maxwell conceded reluctantly. 2 days later, Maxwell found himself driving through the wrought iron gates of Thornton Manor, a sprawling Tudor-style estate nestled among the rolling hills of Litchfield County. The gardens, once the pride of his mother's heart, had grown wild and unkempt over the decades of neglect. His throat tightened unexpectedly at the sight. Marge Peterson greeted him at the entrance, her face weathered by time, but her blue eyes as sharp and observant as ever. At 78, she moved more slowly than he remembered, but her spine remained straight, her manner dignified. Mr. Maxwell, she said, a slight smile warming her austere features. It's been too long since you've come home. Home. The word felt foreign to him. This place had ceased to be home the day his mother had passed away, leaving him in the care of distant relatives who had little interest in a grieving teenager beyond the fortune he would eventually inherit. The East Wing is still sealed off, too. Much work needed, Marge explained as she led him through the main hall, but I've prepared your old bedroom and the main living areas. The kitchen is stocked. Maxwell nodded, taking in the faded grandeur of his childhood home. Dust covers had been removed from the furniture, revealing the antique pieces his mother had lovingly collected. Family portraits lined the walls of the grand staircase. Generations of Thorntons staring down with the same steely determination he recognized in himself. Will you be needing anything else, sir? Marge asked as they reached his bedroom. No, thank you, Marge, I'll manage. She hesitated at the doorway. It's good to have a Thornton back at the manor. Your mother would be pleased. The mention of his mother stirred something in Maxwell. Marge, you were with our family for a long time. Did my mother ever... Was there ever any indication that she... He found himself unable to form the question. Marge's expression revealed nothing. Was there something specific you wanted to ask about your mother, Mr. Maxwell? He shook his head, suddenly uncertain. No, nothing important. After Marge left, Maxwell wandered through the mansion, reacquainting himself with spaces he had deliberately avoided for decades. The library with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves where his mother had taught him to read. The conservatory, where she had played the piano in the evenings. The formal dining room where she had hosted the social events that secured the Thornton family's position in Connecticut high society. Eventually, his feet carried him to the one place he had been both dreading and longing to see, his mother's private sitting room. The door creaked as he pushed it open, revealing a space that seemed frozen in time. Unlike the rest of the house, this room appeared untouched, as though awaiting its owner's return. Eleanor, Thornton's presence lingered here more strongly than anywhere else. Her collection of first-edition novels still lined the bookshelves. The delicate writing desk where she had penned her correspondence stood by the window overlooking what had once been her rose garden. Maxwell approached it hesitantly, running his fingers along the polished surface. On impulse, he tried opening the central drawer, expecting it to be locked. To his surprise, it slid open smoothly, revealing stationery monogrammed with his mother's initials. Beneath the papers lay a small brass key he didn't recognize. Maxwell pocketed the key without thinking, then moved to the built-in bookcase that covered the entire east wall. His eyes were drawn to a leather-bound volume of Emily Dickinson poetry, his mother's favorite. As he pulled it from the shelf, a folded piece of paper fluttered to the floor. With unsteady hands, he unfolded the yellowed page and immediately recognized his mother's elegant handwriting. My dearest Rose, thank you for your latest update on Catherine. The photograph you enclosed brings me both joy and unbearable sorrow. She has Maxwell's smile, though I doubt he remembers how to use it these days. My heart breaks anew knowing my children will grow up as strangers to one another. Thomas asks about her constantly. I cannot bear to tell him he will never be allowed to know his daughter. The sacrifice we have all made for the sake of the Thornton name sometimes seems too great to endure. Please continue to watch over our precious girl. Remind her she is loved, even if she does not know by whom. With eternal gratitude. Eleanor. Maxwell sank into his mother's reading chair, the letter trembling in his grasp. This was no fabrication. The evidence of his mother's secret, of his sister's existence, was written in her own hand. The reality he had constructed about his family, about his mother, began to crumble around him. As the sun set beyond the overgrown gardens, casting long shadows across the sitting room, Maxwell Thornton confronted the possibility that everything he thought he knew about his past might be built on carefully constructed illusions. Illusions that April Gardener's appearance had begun to dismantle, piece by painful piece. The brass key felt unnaturally heavy in Maxwell's pocket as he ascended the narrow staircase to the manor's attic the following morning. Dawn's pale light filtered through dusty dormer windows, illuminating decades of Thornton family history stored in labeled boxes and forgotten trunks. Maxwell had spent a restless night, his mother's letter hidden in his robe pocket, its contents replaying in his mind until sleep finally claimed him in the early hours. Now, driven by a compulsion he couldn't name, he searched the attic systematically, looking for anything that might contain more answers. In the furthest corner, partially hidden beneath an old carpet, he discovered a trunk he didn't recognize. The brass lock matched the key he'd found in his mother's desk. Maxwell inserted the key with trembling fingers. The mechanism yielded with a satisfying click, and he lifted the heavy lid. Inside lay a carefully preserved collection of Eleanor Thornton's most personal possessions, leather-bound journals spanning more than a decade, bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon, and a velvet jewelry box that contained not gems, but a simple pressed rose and a lock of dark hair. With reverence he hadn't felt in years, Maxwell lifted the earliest journal and opened to the first page, September 1962. His mother would have been 26 then, already married to his father, William Thornton, but years before Maxwell's birth. As the morning stretched into afternoon, Maxwell remained in the attic, absorbed in his mother's private thoughts. The journals revealed an Eleanor Thornton far different from the poised society matron he remembered. She described her loneliness in her marriage to the much older William, her passion for garden design that her husband dismissed as a frivolous hobby, her growing friendship with the talented young gardener hired to implement her landscape plans. The entry that finally confirmed everything was dated March 15, 1968. Thomas and I both know this cannot continue. I am with child, his child. William has been in Europe for months. There can be no pretense that this baby is his. Thomas wants to take me away, to start a new life together with our child and Maxwell, but the scandal would destroy everything. The Thornton name, the business William has built, Maxwell's future. I cannot sacrifice all that, even for love. Maxwell closed the journal, his chest tight with emotion. 4 years after his sister's birth, his father had died of a heart attack, leaving Eleanor to raise Maxwell alone and manage the Thornton business interests until he came of age. She had never remarried, never spoken of love or companionship. Now he understood why. The ringing of his cell phone pulled him from his thoughts. It was Jason. "Dad, how are you doing up there? Do you need anything?" Maxwell cleared his throat. "I'm fine, just going through some old family items." "Well, I thought you should know. Diane has been asking questions about some gardener you fired before your episode." Diane, his daughter-in-law. Jason's wife of 7 years was a former model with ambitious social aspirations who had never quite won Maxwell's approval. Her interest in April Gardner immediately set off warning bells. "What kind of questions?" Maxwell asked carefully. "She said she noticed the woman looked remarkably like Grandma Eleanor in the old photos. Then when she heard you fired her abruptly and had some kind of collapse afterward, she got curious." Jason's tone was apologetic. "You know how Diane gets when she thinks there's gossip worth pursuing." "Tell her to drop it," Maxwell said sharply. "It's nothing that concerns her." After hanging up, Maxwell descended from the attic, the journal tucked under his arm. In the kitchen, he found Marge preparing lunch, her movements efficient despite her age. "Marge," he began, setting the journal on the counter, "I need to ask you something, and I need the truth." The housekeeper's hand stilled. "Sir?" "Did. You know, my mother had another child, a daughter she gave up for adoption." Marge's expression remained carefully composed, but her eyes betrayed her. "Mr. Maxwell." "Please, Marge. I've read her journals. I know about Thomas Gardner and their relationship. What I need to know is whether you helped her hide this from me all these years." Marge sighed deeply, wiping her hands on her apron before sitting down at the kitchen table. For the first time in Maxwell's memory, she looked her age, tired, and burdened by secrets kept too long. "Your mother made me promise never to tell," she began softly. "But yes, I knew. I helped arrange the private adoption through my sister Rose. Eleanor was desperate to keep the child within reach somehow, to know she was being cared for properly." Maxwell felt a strange mixture of vindication and betrayal. "And Thomas Gardner, what happened to him?" "Mr. Thornton, your father, discovered the affair just before your mother realized she was pregnant. He banished Thomas from the property, threatened to ruin him if he ever returned. He never knew about the baby." Marge's eyes grew distant with memory. "Thomas moved to a small coastal town in Rhode Island, started his own landscape business there." "Is he still alive?" "Last I heard, yes, though Rose mentioned his health isn't good. Memory problems, I believe." Maxwell processed this information silently. His sister had been raised by Marge's family. No wonder she had found her way back to the Thornton estate. And her biological father, the man his mother had loved, was still alive somewhere in Rhode Island. "Why did she name the child Catherine?" he asked suddenly. A faint smile touched Marge's lips. "After Catherine Hepburn, your mother adored her, that independent spirit, that dignity. She hoped her daughter would inherit those qualities." Marge hesitated before adding, "From what I've heard from Rose over the years, she did." Later that afternoon, Maxwell stood in what had once been his mother's rose garden, now overgrown and wild. The structure remained, stone pathways winding through raised beds, a small fountain at the center. But the carefully tended roses had long since been choked by weeds and volunteer saplings. His phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown. Number, Mr. Thornton, I heard about your health scare. I hope you're recovering well. If you have questions or simply want to talk, I'm here. April Gardner. Maxwell stared at the message, wondering how she had heard about his collapse. The news had been kept quiet, with only family and key executives informed. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. Perhaps Jason was right about Diane's meddling. That evening, as Maxwell sat in his mother's sitting room reviewing more of her journals, his phone rang again. This time it was Victoria Mills, his COO. "Maxwell, I hope I'm not disturbing your recovery," she began, her voice carrying its usual efficient clarity. "What is it, Victoria?" "I've just received a rather strange call from Evelyn Bradford." Maxwell sat up straighter. Evelyn Bradford had been his mother's closest friend for decades, now in her 80s, but still a formidable presence in Connecticut society. "She's hosting her annual garden party next weekend and specifically asked if you would be attending. When I mentioned you were taking some time off for health reasons, she insisted on knowing where you were staying. She seemed unusually interested." Maxwell's mind raced. Had Evelyn somehow learned about April? Had his mother confided in her? Best friend about the child she'd given up? "Tell her I'll be there," he decided abruptly. "Are you sure Dr. Chen was quite explicit about your need for rest and—" "I'm fine, Victoria. The Bradford estate is only 30 minutes from here. I'll make an appearance." After hanging up, Maxwell returned to his mother's journals, searching for any mention of Evelyn Bradford in connection with the secret pregnancy. He found nothing explicit, but noticed that during the months Eleanor must have been pregnant, Evelyn's name appeared frequently as her alibi for extended absences from society events. Meanwhile, in her modest rental cottage near the Hamptons, April Gardner sat at her kitchen table, reviewing a portfolio of landscape designs. Her phone lay beside her, the screen displaying her unanswered text to Maxwell Thornton. She hadn't expected a response, but felt compelled to reach out after Marge Peterson had called to inform her of Maxwell's collapse. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, she found herself face to face with an elegantly dressed woman in her 30s, whose practiced smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "April Gardner. I'm Diane Thornton, Maxwell's daughter-in-law. May I come in? I think we have quite a lot to discuss." April hesitated, immediately wary. "How did you find me?" "Oh, it wasn't difficult. You left your business card on Maxwell's desk." Diane glanced past April into the modest home. Not exactly the accommodations one might expect for a Thornton heir. "I'm not a Thornton heir," April replied firmly. "What do you want, Mrs. Thornton?" Diane's smile tightened. "Information, primarily. You see, my husband stands to inherit Thornton Estates one day. Anything or anyone that might threaten that inheritance naturally concerns me." April stepped aside reluctantly, allowing Diane to enter. As the younger woman examined the cottage with poorly disguised disdain, April felt a growing certainty that this visit would complicate matters considerably. Back at Thornton Manor, Maxwell had fallen asleep in his mother's chair, an open journal on his lap. In his dreams, he saw Eleanor as she had been when he was a child, vibrant, loving, but with a sadness in her eyes he had never understood until now. In the dream, she led him through the rose garden in full bloom, toward a small figure picking flowers in the distance. When he tried to see the child's face, he awoke with a start. The journal had fallen to the floor, open to an entry he hadn't yet read. Maxwell asked about his father again today. At 13, he's becoming more curious about William, creating an idealized version of the cold, controlling man I married. How can I tell him that his father's greatest legacy was not the business empire he built, but the prison of propriety he constructed around us all? A prison that forced me to choose between my children, to sacrifice one for the sake of the other's future. Someday, when Maxwell is older, perhaps I can tell him the truth. About Thomas, about Catherine, about my greatest regret. Perhaps he will understand that love, not duty, should guide life's most important choices. But Eleanor had never had the chance to tell him. A sudden illness had taken her when Maxwell was 14, leaving those words unspoken, that truth buried. Until now. Maxwell closed the journal, his resolve hardening. Tomorrow, he would call the number April had texted from. It was time to hear her story directly, without the filter of shock and disbelief that had colored their first meeting. His mother's words echoed in his mind. Love, not duty, should guide life's most important choices. For the first time in decades, Maxwell Thornton found himself wondering what choice love might guide him to make. The Bradford estate gleamed in the late May sunshine, its manicured lawns dotted with Connecticut's elite in summer finery. Maxwell Thornton adjusted his tie as he stepped from his car, nodding curtly to the valet. Despite his outward composure, anxiety churned within him. After reading more of his mother's journals, he'd spent days debating whether to contact April Gardner directly. The Bradford garden party had provided a convenient reason to delay that decision. Maxwell Thornton, as I live and breathe. Evelyn Bradford approached, resplendent in a pale blue dress and wide-brimmed hat. At 83, she remained a commanding presence, her posture regal, her mind sharp. When Victoria said you were actually taking time off, I feared you might be at death's door. Maxwell accepted her air kiss. Reports of my demise are greatly exaggerated, Evelyn. I acted clearly. Her shrewd eyes assessed him. Though you do look tired. Is the old manor treating you well? Marge keeping you fed? The manor is revealing, Maxwell replied carefully, watching for her reaction. Something flickered in Evelyn's expression, a momentary hesitation. Well, I imagine it holds many memories. She looped her arm through his. Come, there's someone I'd like you to meet. Maxwell allowed himself to be guided through the crowd, exchanging polite greetings with acquaintances while surveying the gathering. Jason and Diane were notably absent, despite having received invitations. Maxwell had insisted they attend a real estate conference in Chicago instead. Anything to keep Diane away from April Gardner until he determined the truth for himself. Here we are, Evelyn announced, stopping near the rose garden where a woman knelt, examining one of the bushes. I've hired a new landscape consultant to rejuvenate my gardens. She has quite the eye for historical accuracy in garden restoration. The woman stood and turned, and Maxwell found himself face to face with April Gardner. Mr. Thornton, she said softly, removing her gardening gloves. What a surprise. Evelyn looked between them, her expression unreadable. You two know each other? How delightful. Ms. Gardner was briefly employed at my Hamptons property, Maxwell managed to say, his voice tight. Was she indeed? Evelyn's tone was innocent, but her eyes gleamed with something that looked suspiciously like satisfaction. April, darling, would you mind checking on the East Garden? I believe the caterers may be trampling my peonies. Once April had walked away, Evelyn's manner changed instantly. Let's not play games, Maxwell. I know exactly who she is. Maxwell stiffened. And what exactly do you think you know? That she's Eleanor's daughter, your half-sister. Evelyn guided him toward a secluded bench beneath an ancient oak tree. Eleanor was my dearest friend for 40 years. Did you really think she could hide something so momentous from me? Maxwell sank onto the bench, momentarily disarmed. You knew all this time and you never said anything? What was there to say? Eleanor made her choice, a heartbreaking one, but hers to make. I respected her wishes while she lived. Evelyn's voice softened. But when April contacted me last month, seeking information about her mother, I couldn't turn her away. Not when she looked so much like Eleanor. You orchestrated this, Maxwell realized. Her being here today, meeting me. Evelyn didn't deny it. Eleanor would have wanted you to know each other. She planned to tell you everything once you finished college, but fate had other ideas. Her gaze turned distant. I was with her in the hospital at the end. Her last coherent words were about her children, both of them. She asked me to watch over you and to make sure Catherine was safe. Maxwell tried to process this revelation. Why didn't you tell me then? I was 14 alone. You were already becoming William's son, ambitious, driven, emotionally guarded. Would you have welcomed the news of a sister born from your mother's affair with the gardener? Evelyn shook her head. Eleanor wanted to tell you herself when you were ready. After she was gone, I honored what I believed were her wishes. Across the lawn, April had returned to the party and was engaged in conversation with a group of guests. One elderly woman had taken her hand, comparing it to her own, as if noting a similarity. "Who is that with April?" Maxwell asked sharply. "Margaret Wilton. She was Eleanor's cousin, one of the few family members who knew about the pregnancy." Evelyn's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Society is full of open secrets, Maxwell. The older generation remembers more than you might think." Before Maxwell could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Jason. "Call me ASAP. Diane's been digging into Gardner woman. Found something concerning." Maxwell excused himself and stepped away to make the call. "Dad," Jason answered immediately. "Diane hired a private investigator to look into April Gardner's background. She was raised in an orphanage, not by adoptive parents. The whole story about finding letters in her parents' attic must be fabricated." Maxwell's jaw tightened. "What else?" The PI found records of her working under different names at several high-end estates over the years, always landscaping positions in wealthy homes, always short-term employment that ended abruptly. Diane thinks she's running some kind of con targeting wealthy families. The suspicion that had briefly subsided now rushed back with renewed force. Where's Diane now? Still in Chicago at the conference. She wanted to fly back when the PI report came in, but I convinced her to stay put until we know more. Jason hesitated. "Dad, if this woman is trying to scam us..." "I'll handle it," Maxwell said curtly. "Stay in Chicago, keep Diane there." He ended the call and turned to find April Gardner standing a few feet away, her expression troubled. "You're upset," she observed quietly. "My daughter-in-law has been investigating you," Maxwell replied, studying her reaction. "She found some discrepancies in your story." April's face paled slightly, but she met his gaze steadily. "Such as?" "You claimed you were raised by adoptive parents and found letters in their attic. Records show you grew up in an orphanage." She nodded slowly. "That's true. I did grow up in Havenbrook Children's Home until I was 17. Rose was a nurse there. She became like a mother to me, though she never formally adopted me. After she retired, I lived with her and her husband. In my mind, they were my parents." She paused. "When Rose passed away last year, I found the letters in her personal effects. I didn't think the technical details mattered." "And your employment history? Working at wealthy estates under different names?" A flash of anger crossed April's features. "I've worked as Catherine Gardner, April Gardner, and Kate Thomas, my adoptive father's surname. Hardly an elaborate identity scheme. And yes, I've worked at many estates. I'm good at what I do, but sometimes clients become uncomfortable when they learn I was raised in an orphanage. Prejudice isn't confined to previous generations, Mr. Thornton." Maxwell wasn't ready to concede. "Why approach me this way? If you believed you were my sister, why not simply come forward directly?" "I tried 3 years ago," April replied, her voice tightening. "I sent a registered letter to your office explaining everything. 2 weeks later, I received a cease and desist letter from Thornton Estates legal department warning me against further contact or defamatory claims about the Thornton family." Maxwell stared at her, genuinely shocked. "I never saw any letter." "I assumed you had." April's shoulders slumped slightly. "After that, I decided a different approach might be necessary. I applied for the gardening position legitimately. I thought perhaps if you knew me as a person first, you might be more willing to consider the possibility when I eventually revealed the truth." Before Maxwell could respond, Evelyn Bradford appeared at his elbow. "I'm sorry to interrupt this clearly intense conversation, but there's a situation developing that requires immediate attention." She turned to April. "Thomas Gardner is here." "He's asking for you?" April gasped. "My father is here." "How?" "Margaret Wilton contacted him after I mentioned you'd be attending today. Apparently they've kept in touch over the years." Evelyn's expression turned apologetic. "I didn't know she was going to do that. He's not well, April. His caregiver brought him, but he seems quite disoriented." Maxwell and April followed Evelyn to a quiet sitting room off the main hallway. An elderly man sat in an armchair, his once powerful frame now diminished by age and illness. Despite his 80 years, Thomas Gardener's eyes remained a striking blue, though clouded with confusion. Beside him sat a middle-aged woman in nurse's scrubs, watching him with concern. "He was having a good day," the caregiver explained quietly. "When Mrs. Wilton called about Eleanor's daughter being here, well, he insisted on coming. I couldn't refuse him." April approached slowly, kneeling before the old man. "Mr. Gardener, I'm Catherine, April." Thomas Gardener studied her face, a spark of recognition lighting his features. "Katie," he said, his voice wavering, "you have your mother's eyes." Tears welled in April's eyes as she took his weathered hand in hers. "You remember me?" "Some days better than others," Thomas replied, momentary clarity sharpening his gaze. "I've kept track of you as best I could. Rose sent photographs sometimes." He reached into his jacket pocket with trembling fingers, extracting a worn photograph identical to the one Maxwell had discovered on April's phone. Maxwell stepped forward, unable to remain a mere observer. "Mr. Gardener?" Thomas looked up, his expression hardening slightly. "The Thornton boy, Maxwell." He glanced between April and Maxwell. "You found each other then. Eleanor would be pleased." "Did you know I had a brother?" April asked softly. Thomas nodded. "Eleanor told me everything. She thought we might all be together someday, after William was gone. But then..." He frowned, struggling to organize his thoughts. "Then she was gone too, and they wouldn't let me see him. Said it would confuse the boy." "Who wouldn't let you see me?" Maxwell asked, an uncomfortable suspicion forming. "The lawyers, your Uncle Richard, said I had no rights, that you were a Thornton and needed to be raised as one." Thomas's focus began to drift, his momentary lucidity fading. "I tried to find you both, tried to keep my promise to her." The caregiver touched April's shoulder gently. "He gets confused about time periods. He'll think it's the 1970s one moment and 2020 the next. But the emotions, the core memories, those are real." April nodded, tears streaming freely down her face now. "I understand." Thomas's gaze cleared briefly as he looked at Maxwell. "You look like him, you know, William. Same jaw, same way of standing." His expression turned wistful. "But you have her heart. Eleanor always said so." Maxwell felt something break loose within him, a dam of emotion he'd held back for decades. "You knew my mother better than I did," he said, his voice rough with suppressed feeling. "No," Thomas replied gently, "just differently." He reached into his pocket again and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "Eleanor wanted you both to have this. I couldn't find you then, but now..." He pressed the pouch into April's hands. "Together, as she wished." April opened the pouch carefully, tipping the contents into her palm. A gold locket emerged, its surface engraved with intricate rose patterns. She clicked it open to reveal tiny photographs. On one side, a baby Maxwell, on the other, an infant April. Between them, visible when the locket was fully opened, was a miniature photograph of Eleanor herself, young and smiling. "She wore it always," Thomas said, his voice fading as fatigue overtook him, hidden beneath her clothes, close to her heart. The caregiver stood. "I should get him back home. This has been a lot of excitement for one day." They prepared to leave. Thomas reached for Maxwell's hand. "She never stopped loving you, either of you." His grip tightened with surprising strength. "Family isn't just blood or name, it's choice. Every day a choice." After Thomas and his caregiver departed, Maxwell, April, and Evelyn remained in the sitting room, the locket resting between them on a small table. "I had no idea he'd kept it all these years," Evelyn said, breaking the silence. "Eleanor gave it to him for safekeeping just before she entered the hospital that last time. She feared William's family would dispose of anything connecting her to Thomas or Catherine." Maxwell stared at the locket, the tangible proof of his mother's enduring love for both her children. "I need time to process all this." "Of course," April said, rising to leave. "I should go as well." "Wait." Maxwell hesitated, decades of ingrained caution warring with newfound understanding. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow, At the manor. There's still much we need to discuss. April studied him, perhaps searching for signs of the earlier suspicion and hostility. Finding none, she nodded. I'd like that. As she left, Evelyn placed a hand on Maxwell's arm. You're more like Eleanor than you know, Maxwell. She would be proud of you today. Maxwell watched April cross the lawn toward the exit, her posture straight and dignified, despite the emotional turmoil she must be feeling. In her carriage, her resilience, he saw echoes of his mother, of their mother. For the first time, he allowed himself to fully consider the possibility that April Gardner might not be a threat to unravel his carefully ordered life, but rather a chance to recover a piece of himself he hadn't known was missing. As dusk settled over Thornton Manor, Maxwell stood at the dining room window watching the gravel driveway for signs of April's arrival. The formal table behind him had been set for two with Eleanor's finest china and crystal, an unconscious decision that, upon reflection, seemed fitting for this momentous evening. The last 24 hours had been a whirlwind of emotion and activity. After returning from the Bradford garden party, Maxwell had spent hours on the phone, first with his corporate attorney, confirming that a cease and desist letter had indeed been sent to April Gardner 3 years earlier without his knowledge. Then with Victoria Mills, instructing her to investigate which executive had intercepted April's letter and authorized the legal response. And finally, with his son Jason, explaining the complicated truth about April's identity. Are you certain she's telling the truth? Jason had asked, understandably skeptical. The evidence is compelling, Maxwell had replied, describing the journals, the photo, and most importantly, the locket. I've spent my entire adult life making judgments about people and investments based on careful analysis of facts. All the facts point to April Gardner being exactly who she claims to be, your aunt. Jason had fallen silent for a long moment before responding. I'll talk to Diane, try to make her understand. Thank you, Maxwell had said, surprised by the surge of affection he felt for his son in that moment. Now, as car headlights swept across the darkening lawn, Maxwell straightened his tie and moved toward the entrance hall. Marge had already opened the door by the time he arrived, greeting April with unexpected warmth. Miss Gardner, Maxwell said formally, then corrected himself. April, thank you for coming. April stood in the entrance, a simple wrap dress replacing her usual work clothes, a small gift bag in her hands. Thank you for inviting me. Her eyes took in the grand foyer with its sweeping staircase and family portraits. It's strange being here, knowing she walked these halls. Maxwell nodded, understanding perfectly. Would you like a tour before dinner? He guided her through the manor, watching as she absorbed details he had long taken for granted. The ornate moldings, the antique furnishings, the collection of leather-bound first editions in the library. In his mother's sitting room, April paused before Eleanor's portrait, studying the painted face with naked emotion. You have her smile, Maxwell observed quietly. April turned to him, surprised. Everyone always said I looked like her, but I never had anything to compare to until recently. I've arranged for copies of all the family photographs to be made for you, Maxwell said. They should be ready next week. That's very kind, thank you. April hesitated before offering him the gift bag she'd been carrying. I brought something for you. For the house, really. Inside, Maxwell found a small terracotta pot containing a budding rose plant, white with the faintest blush of pink at the edges of the petals. It's a heritage variety, April explained. The Eleanor Thornton. I cultivated it from cuttings preserved by Thomas over the years. It was your mother's favorite, developed specifically for her garden here. Maxwell stared at the plant, unexpectedly moved by the gesture. I don't remember. These in the garden. According to Thomas, they were removed after her passing. William ordered the gardeners to replace them with standard varieties. April's expression softened. This might be the only surviving specimen of this particular rose. During dinner, their conversation flowed more easily than Maxwell had anticipated. April shared stories of her life, her struggles growing up without family, her discovery of solace and purpose in garden work, her gradual piecing together of her origins through Rose's carefully preserved mementos. Rose always told me I was special, that I had been entrusted to her care by someone who loved me very much but couldn't keep me, April recalled, twirling her wine glass thoughtfully. On my 18th birthday, she gave me a silver bracelet engraved with my initials, K-E-T. She said it had come with me as a baby. I didn't understand the significance of the T until I found the letters last year. Catherine Eleanor Thornton, Maxwell said softly. April nodded. For most of my life, I was simply Catherine Eleanor Gardner, named after my biological father, though I didn't know that then. As dessert was served, April asked the question Maxwell had been expecting all evening. "Where do we go from here, Maxwell?" He considered carefully before answering. "I've instructed my attorneys to prepare documents legally acknowledging you as Eleanor Thornton's daughter and my half-sister. There will be a trust established in your name, your rightful share of our mother's estate with accumulated interest." April began to protest, but Maxwell raised a hand to stop her. "This isn't charity, April, it's your birthright. While no amount of money can compensate for what was taken from you, it can perhaps make your future more secure." "That's generous," April said, clearly uncomfortable. "But I didn't seek you out for financial gain." "I know that now." Maxwell met her gaze directly. "You wanted what I've had my entire life, a sense of identity, of belonging, family." He paused, organizing his thoughts. "I can't give you back the years we might have had as siblings growing up together, but perhaps we can build something meaningful going forward." The next morning found them walking the overgrown paths of what had once been Eleanor's rose garden. April moved through the space with professional assessment, occasionally kneeling to examine the soil or the structure of a neglected plant. "It could be restored," she said finally, standing and brushing dirt from her hands. "The bones are still good. The irrigation system would need updating and the soil amended, but with proper care it could bloom again by next summer." Maxwell had been watching her work, struck by how at home she seemed among the tangled roses. "Would you do it?" he asked suddenly. April looked at him in surprise. "Restore the garden?" "Yes, as a professional commission." He gestured to the expanse around them. "No one knows these roses better than you, and certainly no one has a greater personal stake in seeing them restored to their former glory." Slow smile spread across April's face. "I'd be honored, but I thought you lived primarily in your Manhattan apartment in the Hamptons house. Who would enjoy the garden here?" "I've been considering that," Maxwell replied, surprising himself with the words even as he spoke them. "The manor has stood empty too long. Perhaps it's time to make it a home again." 3 months later, on a warm September afternoon, Maxwell stood on the terrace overlooking the gardens, where crews worked diligently under April's direction. Stone pathways had been uncovered and repaired, beds restructured, and the first new plantings established. At the center, the restored fountain bubbled cheerfully, water catching the sunlight like scattered diamonds. Jason appeared at his side, surveying the transformation. "It's coming along beautifully. April certainly knows what she's doing." Maxwell nodded, pride evident in his expression. "She's reclaiming our mother's vision. Eleanor would be pleased." "Diane's coming around, you know," Jason said after a moment. "Meeting Thomas Gardner last week. Seeing the locket, it's hard to deny the evidence." "Your wife values family status and security above all else," Maxwell observed without rancor. "Learning that April has no interest in challenging your inheritance has helped considerably, I imagine." Jason had the grace to look embarrassed. "We're working on it. She's agreed to host Thanksgiving dinner for everyone at our place in November." "Progress indeed," Maxwell said dryly, though pleased by the development. Below, April was instructing workers on the placement of a special rose arbor, her hands gesturing animatedly as she explained exactly what she wanted. The transformation in her over the past months had been as remarkable as that of the garden. She moved with newfound confidence, her natural reserve giving way to assertive expertise in her domain. Nearby, Thomas Gardner observed from his wheelchair, attended by his caregiver. His good days had grown more frequent since reconnecting with his daughter, and though his memory remained inconsistent, his joy in watching April work was unwavering. Maxwell had arranged for the best neurological care available, and while his condition couldn't be reversed, his comfort and quality of life had improved significantly. Maxwell's phone buzzed with a message from Evelyn Bradford. Annual Autumn. Gala committee meeting tomorrow. Expecting you in April, no excuses. Since the revelatory garden party, Evelyn had taken it upon herself to integrate April into Connecticut society, not as Maxwell's recently discovered sister, though rumors inevitably circulated, but as a distinguished landscape expert whose designs were revitalizing some of the area's most historic gardens. April had accepted these efforts with gracious bemusement, adapting to her new social position with the same quiet resilience she had demonstrated throughout her life. That evening, Maxwell, April, Thomas, and Marge gathered in the manor's newly reopened conservatory for an informal dinner. Thomas was having one of his clearer days, regaling them with stories of Eleanor's ambitious garden plans and their clandestine meetings among the roses. She knew every Latin name, every growing condition, Thomas recalled, his weathered face animated with memory. Most society ladies just told their gardeners what colors they wanted where. Not Eleanor. She got her hands dirty right alongside me. That's where I get it from then, April laughed, showing her soil-stained fingernails. Your mother had the soul of an artist, Thomas continued, his gaze turning distant, too confined by the world she was born into. She wanted both her children to live more freely, to follow their hearts without fear. Maxwell considered these words, reflecting on the driven, emotionally guarded man he had become, so different from what his mother had apparently hoped for him. Yet here he was, opening his life and heart to family connections he would have rejected outright just 6 months earlier. The following spring, as the restored rose garden burst into magnificent bloom, Maxwell hosted a garden dedication ceremony. The event brought together an unlikely assembly, elite members of Connecticut society, mingling with gardening enthusiasts, landscape professionals, and residents from the coastal Rhode Island town where Thomas had established his business decades earlier. At the center of the garden, Maxwell unveiled a simple bronze plaque, the Eleanor Thornton Rose Garden, restored with love by her children, Maxwell and Catherine. As attendees wandered the pathways admiring April's meticulous work, Evelyn Bradford linked her arm through Maxwell's. I knew Eleanor would find a way to bring you two together eventually, she said with satisfaction. She was nothing if not determined. You helped considerably, Maxwell acknowledged wryly. Someone had to give fate a nudge. Evelyn patted his hand affectionately. You've changed, Maxwell, for the better. He couldn't dispute her observation. The rigid, controlling businessman who had fired April Gardner in a panic less than a year ago had undergone a profound transformation. Weekly dinners with his sister had become a cherished ritual. Regular visits with Thomas Gardner had provided insights into his mother he would otherwise never have known. Even his relationship with Jason had deepened, their conversations extending beyond business to matters of family and legacy. Across the garden, April was showing a group of visitors the special section dedicated to the Eleanor Thornton Rose. The heritage plants had thrived under her expert care, their delicate blooms filling the air with sweet fragrance. She caught Maxwell's eye and smiled, a warm, genuine connection between siblings once strangers, now family. Later that evening, as the last guests departed, Maxwell and April walked the garden paths in comfortable silence. The setting sun cast long shadows across the grounds, bathing everything in golden light. I've been thinking, Maxwell said finally, about establishing a foundation in Mother's name, something to support family reunification efforts, perhaps focusing on helping orphaned children connect with biological relatives when appropriate. April's eyes brightened with interest. That sounds wonderful. What inspired this? Something Thomas said months ago about family being a choice we make every day. Maxwell paused beside a particularly vibrant Eleanor Thornton rose. Mother made an impossible choice, giving you up to protect both of us within the constraints of her time. Perhaps we can help create a world where fewer parents face such heartbreaking decisions. April touched the rose gently, her expression thoughtful. I'd like to be involved, if you're open to it. I was counting on it, Maxwell replied with a smile. The Thornton Gardner Family Foundation has a nice ring to it, don't you think? As twilight descended over Thornton Manor, brother and sister continued their walk through the garden their mother had loved, a garden now blooming anew, with possibility, forgiveness, and the promise of a shared future neither could have imagined a year before. The white roses glowed softly in the fading light, resilient and beautiful, like the family bonds that had withstood decades of separation, only to emerge stronger for having been tested. In her portrait hanging in the sitting room, Eleanor Thornton seemed to smile with quiet satisfaction, as though she had known all along that her children would eventually find their way back to each other, and in doing so, find their way home.